Kia ora everyone, I'm Valerie. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess, publishing and social struggle. And I want to ask, in a time of war, what can writers do that is useful, entertaining, beautiful, in a living, vital way? That was what Langston Hughes, the African-American poet, social activist, and novelist, asked in 1937 while he was in Madrid, in the midst of one of the most vicious anti-fascist fights in history. He founded a hub where artists came and went, and where a press donated by French comrades operated. They ran theater groups that toured the trenches. They gave lessons and lectures to soldiers and helped edit brigade newspapers, helping people take possession of the war that had overtaken their lives, making it theirs as they narrated it. It is part of the magic of publishing that is a reflection of reality and a storehouse of our dreams and imagination. It envelops the horror and the hopes of existence. Publishing connects the public sphere to our private experiences, and in the best cases, it helps us to make sense of the world and what's happening. It will come as little surprise to you that we're living in a time of mass upheaval. Would you call this a war? I would say that we're living now in a cold war that's getting warmer by the day, much like the climate. It's a war of slow violence against Māori in the form of ongoing colonial white supremacy. It's the daily deluge of horrific violent threats against transgender people. It is the hunger and poverty that has become an accepted feature on the streets amidst astonishing levels of wealth and privilege. It is the already arrived ecological breakdown that will cast us into a landscape that will disrupt all attempts to return to normal. It is the rise of fascism across the globe. So to return to Langston's question, what can we do as writers and as publishers in Aotearoa? And as a kind of answer to that question, I want to sketch a little history of Rebel Press and how its history has been intertwined with the struggles of the day, some of the questions and the problems that we encountered, and where things are headed. Rebel Press started in 2006 with the publication of Down with Empire, Up with Spring, a text that was pulled from the British ecological and anarchist journal called Do or Die. At the time, we said, quote, despite its British-centric perspective, we believe this work is both hugely inspiring to those of us involved in ecological struggles here in Aotearoa, and also helpful in placing these struggles in the context of the general fight against power and capital. It's a lucid account of the last 15 years of the ecological movement in Britain and the development of their tactics and vision, and offers many creative ideas for those of us in Aotearoa fighting similar battles. However, it's not without its faults, we said. The treatment of Indigenous people is strongly imbued with a colonizing ethos that must be read critically, especially in the context of Māori and Indigenous struggle in the Pacific. The publication of this text was intimately connected with the Save Happy Valley campaign. You'll see the protest banner behind me outside of the Solid Energy office. By feeding ideas and strategies to the local and radical 2-year-long occupation and campaign to stop a vast open-cast coal mine on the west coast by state-owned company Solid Energy during the term of Helen Clark. And those little details are important because the campaign was beset by not one but two infiltrators. First, by a young student paid by the private detective firm of 2 ex-cops called Thompson and Clark that was tasked by the company itself to spy on all of us. And the second, a police informant called Rob Gilchrist, who was on the payroll of the Threat Assessment Unit of the police for years, providing intel on all left-wing social movements across the country. We were under attack by the state in its imperative to protect capital. This was the same thing that was happening in social movements around the world, the Green Scare in the United States, the infiltration of the Metropolitan Police into anti-racist struggles and environmental struggles in the UK. And this was a major topic of discussion in our political journals and reflected in our publications and books of the day. In early 2007, Rebel Press published my first book, Against Freedom, The War on Terrorism in Everyday New Zealand Life. The book was an attempt to explain the importation of the US war agenda into life here, the impacts on civil liberties, protests, marginalized groups such as refugees and migrants. In the book, I said it's now more dangerous than ever to speak out, to be a dissident. 6 months later, on the 15th of October 2007, that statement became really far more real than I ever anticipated, as 300 police raided houses across the country, including what would become later the Rebel Press office, and put 17 of us in prison that day with charges under the Terrorism Suppression Act pending. It was early in 2008 that Rebel Press moved into our office in Trades Hall, the space I had been living in. We acquired, I didn't really want to go back there after the police raids. We acquired a large manual guillotine from the local punks. We purchased a printer that could produce double-sided A3 and a small perfect binding machine funded by money from our own pockets, later repaid by our publishing efforts. Making books at Rebel Press has always been more of an art project than a book factory, with each stage requiring its own attention to annoying details. And if any of you heard Branovan yesterday, you will know a little bit more about that. Up until just last year when we got our new printer, we literally had to interleave all of the pages of every book we made. And this was because most pages emerged from the printer with a curl. So we corrected for the curl by literally interleaving all of the pages. So most of the books have been touched by every single book has been touched, every single page by someone in the collective. Our perfect binder also required the help that we help it be a bit more perfect by adding glue to the spine at times to ensure the pages didn't fall out. After my arrest, Rebel Press became a hub for our Solidarity campaign. We published the October 15th Solidarity newspaper and our irregular anarchist journal, Imminent Rebellion, the pages of which were a place for discussion of struggles, both local and international, and a place for ideas. We produced hundreds of leaflets, posters, booklets, stickers, and agitprop for the radical community. As an explicitly anarchist collective, we rejected the idea of taking funds from the state. It was our view that the liberal state was as much of a problem as capital, and that taking funds from it was in and of itself compromising. Rebel Press was sustained by our sales and our community, of course. As someone facing arms charges for an attempted insurrection, I was and remain unlikely ever to get government money. So it's a little bit of a natural barrier. Rebel Press continued to be a hub for activism and for radical publishing, producing works including Catherine Amy's comprehensive Compassionate Contrarians, The History of Vegetarianism in New Zealand, Jared Davidson's Remains to be Seen, a story about the US IWW organizer Joe Hill and his relationship to the radical union movement here in the lead up to World War I, and Tui Bailey's Why Reject the Treaty. I also published my oral history, The Day the Raids Came, Stories of Survival and Resistance to the State Terror Raids. In 2010, we produced a book of poetry and song lyrics by a local punk called Some Justice. And I relate the story because it really represented for us a major collective failure. I relate it here so that maybe somebody can take something out of our experience a little bit. At the time the book was being prepared for publication, one of our collective members was overseas. And we didn't really take very much collective oversight of it. On the eve of the book launch, the collective member who had been overseas returned, and she objected to the publication of the book on the grounds that it contained fat-phobic lyrics and was generally dreary and nihilistic. We had to decide what to do, and in the end, there was a bit of a compromise. We published the book, but included a kind of an apologia of sorts in it. And after the first print one, we agreed not to print it again. Needless to say, it was a really painful episode for the collective that illustrated our collective processes and editorial involvement needed to be more robust. What was the point of publishing things that people in our own collective found oppressive? During this time, we also upgraded our gear, buying a serious binding machine secondhand from an old print shop in Nelson. And I want to bring Murdoch Stevens in here to the story because Lawrence and Gibson had always used Rebel Press's gear, but were otherwise not involved in the space. Murdoch was always took a keen interest in the machines and was always looking for ways to make things more efficient and cheaper, and that hasn't really changed. He was to inherit this role in the new iteration of Rebel Press, and I just want to show a quick video, if it's possible. Yeah, I think so. I think it will play. You can't hear it, but that's the binding machine in operation there. So it's great fun to operate. That's Claire there with her new book. Very excited about that. Yeah. And we also got a color printer about this time, a fantastic upgrade for us. Mind you, this lovely picture of Sasha there with our other friend Helene is the new printer. We decided to get a service agreement that meant we paid a very, very nominal amount per print to the company, and in return we get consumables, so ink cartridges and other things to keep the printer going, and free service calls. We had all had too many experiences of collective responsibility for gear that ultimately meant it either fell to one person or that the gear broke down and was unusable. The service agreement meant that we didn't have to worry about those things, and it's meant that we almost always have a functioning machine, which is really pretty fantastic. Needless to say, owning our own gear was absolutely critical for us. We were and are happy to use external printers for parts of the book, like book covers or really high quality images, but for us, having control of the means of production has given us a freedom to do what was important to us. So fast forward a few years to 2019, and Rebel Press was a publishing collective, was effectively defunct, with my two good mates, Torrance and Ali, both having moved to Australia. It was time to do something new with the space, and it was really clear to me that the space was underutilized, and that our own capacity to be book publishers was not equal to the opportunity presented by having a permanent office with the gear. In effect, the office had become my personal activist office with very little publishing that was happening, save for the occasional Lawrence and Gibson book. As a result, we weren't even doing great paying the rent, and things looked and felt very fragile. So it was at that stage that it became apparent that broadening out the way the space was run was critical for its survival. Murdoch was a natural pick to be part of the reimagined space, given his critical role in holding the machines together, his willingness to help out a wide range of aspiring publishing projects, and his friendly connection to the existing collective. Several members of the Freedom Shop, our local anarchist bookstore, were another key part of Rebel Press's future, guaranteeing a political ethos that held to the origins of Rebel Press. And then there was Sasha, who was at the time keen to break free from her job at Bridget Williams and chart her own course in publishing, and she and Achille and Five Ever have been doing that ever since. For me, I found a new crew that is interested in carrying on the kind of work Rebel Press did for publishing. It's called Left of the Equator Press, and we make books for a world beyond capitalism and colonialism. So things at the office are really, really humming. We've got a lot of people using the space. And it feels like a really vibrant model and a really vibrant way to do things. And it's really fantastic the way that it's gone from being one thing to being something new. And I think in some ways something better. Like Rebel Press, I would say now, as a publishing space, is supporting a serious part of a literary and radical ecosystem for Wellington, which I think is fantastic, much more so than it was ever able to do in the past. And not everything that gets produced at Rebel Press is radical literature or revolutionary text, and that's okay. I think giving people the opportunity to create things themselves in and of itself is a pretty revolutionary act in the kind of world that we live in now. So, and for lots and lots of people, that's a hugely illuminating experience that I think takes what is often a very objectified and kind of abstracted experience and makes it really personal for the people that are involved and brings it a lot closer to everybody. It also means that we can produce books there at a time, for example, during COVID, when lots of overseas publishers were unable to actually produce books. So having that means of production is really important. Long may it continue. So from here, what's next for Rebel Press, and where to for radical publishing? Well, 4 years ago, in the midst of the Ihumātao occupation, I published Tina Ngata's book, Kia Mau, Resisting Colonial Fictions. It was a direct response to the government's decision to celebrate the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's invasion of Aotearoa. In that book, Tina takes on to dismantle the foundational premises of white supremacy and colonization in this country, the doctrine of discovery. And 4 years on, her book is still our bestseller. This, along with the runaway success of books like Lawrence and Gibson's recent Turncoat by Tehima Baker, fantastic poetry of Renee Williams, in Butter on Toast in the Morning, published by Five Everett, shows, I think, how deep the hunger is in this country for decolonization and for radical change. I think that the space that is wide open in publishing now is to talk about what our future could be. Beyond decolonization, beyond capitalism, beyond patriarchy, because we can all see the problems. We can all see the failure of this system that we are existing in now. The model of Rebel Press as a publishing space can be replicated across Aotearoa. Having control over resources like what's happening here at yours is imperative if we want to dismantle systems of oppression. So I want to thank everybody for your time and just say I want to leave on a high note with the beautiful words of Arundhati Roy. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Kia ora koutou.